Good evening and welcome to the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. We're glad that you're here. We have some sad news at the top of our agenda. Former Commissioner John Josserin passed away over the past few days. We just got notice of it today. John served on this commission as well as did a ton of work with our sister cities advisory board. I know many of the commissioners here remember John fondly and just ask for a moment of silence on John's behalf. Thank you very much. To some more uplifting news. Part of our job at our May meeting is to recognize those commissioners whose terms are expired. For members of the public, our planning commissioners can serve 2 3-year terms. We have 2 outgoing commissioners tonight, and it's my privilege to say a few words and thank them for their service to Penny Von Auken and Clay Britton. For Penny, civic engagement is a family duty. She served on the Eudora School Board for 12 years before her appointment to the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. Many of us here on the commission have attended joint meetings with the Eudora Planning Commission that her husband Kurt has been on, and they have been giving each other winks and romantic nods and smiles the whole time. It's rare that Planning Commission is a family affair, but for them it certainly is. I have really always trusted Penny to ask the questions that I didn't ask. If I look at and prepare my packet, I always think, what will Penny ask? Because she always asks something that I had never even thought of, and I really, really appreciate that. At one of our first meetings, I noticed her highlighted notes on the packet. If you don't know, Penny has, show off your fancy new iPad. Penny brings her iPad every time, and our packets, folks, can be like 145 pages long. And Penny has highlighted things and written all these notes on the side. And I remember my first time as a planning commissioner, I saw that and went, oh my gosh, that set a really high bar. So thank you for setting that, Penny, for giving us something to aspire to. Her perspective on rural issues is always welcomed on the commission, even if one of our former chairs, Mr. Bruce Lee, thought he could not get your name correct. So Penny, I am always appreciative of your attention to detail, your genuine curiosity regarding issues that face our community and our citizens, and most importantly, the care you provided for all of our commissioners, our staff, and our public. So thank you very much for your service for the community, and we wish you well, Penny. And we have this awesome plaque, and I don't know what's in the note, to be honest with you. So congratulations, Penny. Thank you very, very much.
I'll miss you all.
Oh, thank you.
I'll miss the involvement. I'll miss everything but the packets. Thank you.
Planning Commission is a little bit like Game of Thrones. As soon as you get to like someone on the commission and really get to know them, it's time for them to go away. And one of those people who's also leaving us tonight after his last meeting is Clay Britton. I will tell you, as chair of the Planning Commission, you spend a lot of your time keeping score. You want to really make sure that everybody has said what they need to say. You want to make sure the public gets their questions answered, that developers had time to speak, and that there's enough votes to call the question. One thing I never need to keep score on is who gets the most votes of agreement. How many times do I hear, I agree with Commissioner Britton? I have to agree with Commissioner Britton. Commissioner Britton makes a really good point. Clay has a really amazing ability to bring people who disagree on something or together. He's able to discern the issues. I've seen him work with 2 lawyers on our commission who were nothing but egotistical and in the bureaucratic minutia that was way off of our charge, bring them together on an issue, bring them back to the issue, and smile about it in the end. And it's amazing what he's able to do. He has a wit and a humor that really is nice to have on the commission. I'm sure we will certainly miss that with Clay leaving us. And he's super smart. He's also probably the best father I know. And so while we will miss him, it's time for him, as Grant told him, for him to go back to his family. And Clay, thank you so much for your service and your work.
Well, I will also miss all of you, although I will not miss the packets. I think it's been a real honor and a real privilege. The thing that's most impressive about this whole thing the last 6 years has been how amazing the staff are. I had no idea how dedicated and capable and skilled. I mean, you just don't hear about all the work that they do and all the work that goes into everything. Not only the process that we do here, but the thinking that informs everything that we end up being able to say yay or nay to. So I'm really, I remember I always watched that show Parks and Rec, even before I was on the Planning Commission. And so I had, just kind of this comical view of, what it might be like to work in a city government or something. And while confirming some of those preconceived notions, mostly I just am really impressed at what our city does, our city staff, and Scott, from you on down, being chair for a year and seeing really all the work and thinking that goes into what you guys do is really impressive. So I look forward to you guys having to work with this commission and the next commission and all that, and I have confidence that everybody's going to keep doing a great job. If I could do another 3-year term and not feel selfish about it, I would totally do it. This has been really fun, an honor to get to know you guys. The other night we were flying back from California and it was nighttime. It was like almost midnight, and I was leaning over my wife's shoulder as we were coming in to Kansas City, but we were still probably 8,000 feet or something. And I looked out, and of course it's all black out there with little patches of light. And I looked, and all of a sudden I was like, that's Lawrence. And before my brain could even really recognize that that was Lawrence, like something in me knew that was Lawrence because I'd studied, the satellite view so many times or something. And all you could see was, the grids of the streets and some of the nodes and, the downtown, and then a blank where maybe the river would be and things like that. You, of course, couldn't see a whole lot out in the county because it was dark the way they like it. But it just struck me that 6 years ago, I never would have been able to look out the window into pitch black and see Lawrence sort of shining up there back at me. And so that's a great gift that I think the Planning Commission has given me, to be able to sort of recognize our community in that way that maybe I never would have been able to otherwise. So the Planning Commission is awesome. The planning staff is awesome. I will miss you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Clay. All right,
Can I just say,
Oh, go for it, yes.
I agree with
That's all. The only reason people say that a lot is because I talk a lot.
No, it's not. Okay, thanks for indulging us that moment, and we will now move on to our agenda. The first thing we have is an action summary. That's what we call our minutes from our meeting on March 15th, 2017. I will entertain a motion to make any changes to those minutes or approve them. Commissioner Britton?
I move that we approve. Are we just doing the March first?
Let's
Or
do
both
March
together?
and then we'll do April.
All right, move to approve March.
Second, Commissioner Struckoff. All in favor, signify by raising your hand. Great, thank you. Moving on to April 24th and 26th, extra reading because it was 2 nights. Any changes or motion to approve? Commissioner Britton, Commissioner Von Auken. I'm assuming you're motioning to approve the minutes? Okay, good, excellent. All in favor, raise your hand. Thank you. Passes 8-0. Gotta do my count real quick. Any committee reports that have met over the past month? Seeing none, we'll move on. Any written communications from the public other than what was in our packet? Any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
We did place a memo that Sandy will review with you on the item 1A.
Thank you. Any written action of any waiver request determinations made by the city engineer?
Oh, sir.
At this time, we ask for our commissioners to share any ex parte communications. For the public, ex parte communications are those communications that happen outside this body on any of the items that we're discussing. We do expect our commissioners to share what they have, the conversations they've had, so that we can all be privileged to those discussions. Is there anyone who has ex parte communications to share? All right. any declarations of extensions from specific agenda items by commissioners? All right, we're on to the regular agenda for May 24th. We have 5 items tonight. Our first item is for a special use permit for LMH on 3rd and Michigan Street, and we're going to do item 1A and 1B together. For the public, I'll share with you a little bit what our process is. For each of our items, we get a report from the staff. We have received a packet of information that you've heard a little bit about and read through it, but the staff will summarize what's in that packet. Then the applicant will make a statement, and then we open it up for public hearing. If anybody would like to comment on the item before us, if you're an individual, you have 3 minutes to visit with the commission. If you're speaking on behalf of a group, you have 5 minutes to talk to the commission. At that point, we'll give it back to the applicant if they have any comments they'd like to make based on what they've heard from the public. And then we close the public hearing and bring it up here. The commission can ask questions of staff, the applicant, or the public. We do ask that you keep your answers specific to the questions that we ask. We'll have discussions, and then we'll eventually take a vote on the item. That's how we roll here at Douglas County Lawrence Planning Commission. Sandy, kick it off. 1A.
Actually have 2 items that are related to this project that you're considering this evening. The first item is the special use permit, which is actually the institutional development plan for this property. Properties that have certain district zonings. Hospital is one of them. They're a special purpose district. They are typically related to those public facilities, and they're required to have essentially a master plan. So that is an item that you'll take up this evening as 1A, and the code requires that process that we do an institutional development plan. You consider it as if it were a special use permit. Related to this, and what's really initiating all of this, is the applicant's request to do a parking lot expansion, which is item 1B, and that requires a rezoning to have a consolidated zoning district for this improvement. An item that will not be coming to you but is also related to this project is a minor subdivision, which we are working through administratively. The hospital is located in the Pinckney neighborhood. It is surrounded by residential zoning districts of a varying kind in most areas. There is institutional zoning here on the east side. This includes the community health building, Bert Nash. This is the school district property, which I think is also involved with Bert Nash improvements or changes in the future. That would be a separate plan that would come forward to you. You have single-family residential zoning to the west and a mix of residential zoning further to the south. The area on this portion of the east side is zoned RSO, which is a mixed residential office zoning district, and that block face is developed with office uses. Regarding this proposed zoning that is included in this packet, there are 6 residential lots that are located on the east side of Michigan. They are currently zoned RS5 as a residential zoning district, and right across from them would be RS7. One of the things that we looked at with this project was its mix of uses as well as parking. The applicant discussed with us quite a bit about how to convey what those parking numbers are required for this use. The development code says that for hospitals, you provide parking based on the number of beds, but Lawrence Memorial Hospital, as many hospitals are, have multiple uses that are associated with them, not only just the hospital and the emergency facility, but also medical office. We have some active recreation, which is associated with Woody Park, but we also have things like the fitness program in the hospital, although we didn't do a separate parking calculation for that one. A couple of uses within the hospital are very employee intensive, and so we did look at a calculation for parking based on the number of employees. So what that brought us to was a certain number of parking spaces, although what is proposed and what exists for this site certainly does exceed that particular number. The project would include a total of 1,222 parking spaces. This includes parking spaces that are on the street, which would be a future phase improvement if the hospital determines that that parking is needed. So we'll talk about phasing here in just a second. How that parking is distributed, we have a number of accessible spaces as well as on-street parking and 2 spaces that are dedicated for RV parking, and the applicant can address that with you if you have more interest in that particular type of parking. How that parking is distributed, this is Main Street. The master plan or the institutional development plan includes not only the hospital property, but properties on the east side of Main Street. It includes a parking lot that was previously developed at the corner of 3rd Street. It includes 2 office buildings that are located kind of across from the emergency department or a little bit down the street from that. And then this is the existing on-street parking that we find within that immediately surrounding area. Within the hospital campus, we see these uses on the south side. The project shows this future parking arrangement of angled parking, which would increase that on-street parking. And again, this is if that becomes necessary with this project. Arkansas Street is this street here. This is a portion of the street was actually previously vacated under a previous master plan for the hospital. This shows that future parking or that phase 2 parking that would be assessed depending on how things work out with the facility planning that they're doing right now. This area here along Michigan Street is really where that expanded parking lot is proposed to be located. Its access would be from 3rd Street. It would also have access internally to the existing parking lot. This project specifically includes this expansion, but it does not include these 2 residences that will remain on that block face for the time being. The other element that we have on this north side is the helipad that does have some implications on how you go through this area. This is an internal driveway, but it is very much a neighborhood cut through to that other side of the east side of the neighborhood. When the helicopter is in use, that access is blocked. The parking lot expansion we've talked about a little bit. There are a number of conditions that were reflected in the master plan and staff's report to you. The applicant provided a revised plan on Friday, and we were able to look through some of that, and many of those conditions have been addressed. So that was the memo that you got this afternoon, and that was also after staff conferring with other staff, with the utilities department and also with our transportation planners about the bicycle parking. So that has resulted in some revised conditions for you, and we'll go through those in just a second. One of the aspects of this project includes the extension of the Lawrence Loop. There is a piece of the loop that is missing here. It's a missing link. It could potentially go through hospital property. So one of the things the applicant did was provide a revised plan that showed a conceptual alignment for a piece of that goes from the end of the Sandra Shaw Trail across over to, I think, Michigan Street. We did not ask the applicant to dedicate specific easement for that alignment because the city has also initiated a project to work with BG Consultants to look at an alignment. So we're doing a study to actually determine that. It may yet go through the hospital property through Woody Park, or it may result at some other alignment. But it's trying to connect these 2 points somewhere through that portion of the Pinckney neighborhood. The applicant also requested some changes to those conditions, and that was really kind of that discussion that we started on Friday and resulted in the revised conditions that you have. They affect condition number 3G and 4, and it may have been actually H. I had some formatting problems with some new software, so that may change a little bit. So the applicant proposed that new language that basically saying when that final alignment is determined, that LMH and the city would work together to determine that cost, and it certainly if it goes through the property. Staff concurred with this revised language, and so that would be that revised condition for that particular item. Staff's recommendation is for approval on the master plan. This is a copy of that revised plan, and what is probably very difficult to see is all the additional landscaping that was added per staff's recommendation. This is that conceptual alignment that picks up from Main Street through Woody Park, across the hospital property, and then connects back in over to Arkansas. Conditions in your packet for the special use permit 1 and 2 do not change based on the discussion and the revised plan. Those are things that still need to happen that we work through the regular process. Some of the other conditions that have been met, we asked the applicant to show some additional detail about parking that was provided. We've had some clarification on some of the infrastructure and the sanitary sewer extensions that need to occur, as well as the landscaping that I've mentioned. So your conditions really boil down to number 3 is to show the sanitary sewer line extended per the city engineer, utility engineer's approval. The applicant requested a reduction in the number of bicycle parking from 120 something down to 86. Staff concurs with that reduction. That's still almost 70% of the required bicycle parking distributed throughout the campus, but we have also recommended that all bicycle parking meet the minimum BP standard. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. So that can actually park and secure the bicycle in a space. Some of the older bike racks that are out there today are not sufficient to be able to park the total number of bikes that they were designed to. They are more for elementary school bicycles rather than an adult bicycle that we see today. There is an additional note that needs to be added regarding the alignment of the path that we've noted to the applicant, and then we have that revised language that we talked about as well. With regard to the zoning, staff recommends and supports the proposed rezoning for a uniform district for this project, and there were no conditions related to that zoning itself. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Sandy. We may have some here in just a bit. This time we invite the applicant or representative of the applicant.
Hi, C.L. Maurer with Landplan Engineering. I'm here for LMH. We also have Rich and Webb, and we have Rick Bellinger. Let me get it right here. With us this evening too. So if there's any questions I can't answer, one of those two will help me out on that. We agree with staff on everything, so there's not really any questions of our presentation. I do have one. I'll show you just a quick rendering of what we came up with on what this parking lot will look like. Now, tree-wise, it'll be a few years before we get that many trees, but at least you have an idea of where this is influenced. Michigan is down here towards the bottom, and then 3rd Street's here on this north side. So it kind of tucks in here. It will be elevated a little bit off of Michigan Street because of the access to get these two parking lots connected. There's like a 12-foot difference between Michigan Street and that parking lot. So I've got to grade and fill that lot to get it in there. So, but at least it's a rendered idea of what it will look like for you guys. It's probably a little easier to see than just the black and white. So, other than that, if you have any questions for me,
We may hear in a bit. Yeah. Thank you, Seal.
thanks.
Any members of the public wish to speak on this item? As he comes to the podium, members of the public, if you sign in there, right next to that mouse, right to the right of the mouse, and then share with us your name and address, we'd appreciate that.
I'm Ernest Richardson. I live in 215 Arkansas, so I'm directly affected. This is the first we've seen of this. I mean, normally the hospital or somebody would give us a heads up, have some kind of a meeting, but they haven't this time. My concern is the parking, the off-street parking on Arkansas, the 200 block. They show diagonal parking. Unless my eyes deceive me, those cars are going to be parking facing southeast. And the only way they can do that is if they make Arkansas a one-way street south. That's my main concern. You know, I'd like to have seen some of this earlier, but I guess they didn't want us to know, so thank you.
Thank you. We'll ask about that one-way street here in just a minute.
Hello, I'm Bart Littlejohn. I'm the Pinckney Neighborhood President. And I just wanted to go ahead and, well, I think we sent in written communication, but I wanted to go ahead and comment as well. We've been pretty fortunate, and we appreciate that LMH came in and went ahead and distributed and acknowledged and that there was a parking problem and let us know about what their plans would be. They came in at approximately 2 meetings, the January meeting and the March meeting. And I'm sorry that you weren't aware of that. We try to go ahead and publicize our meetings, so be sure to look out for us next time. But one of our main concerns that I'm seeing right now and that they've gone ahead and discussed with us as well was when they go back in with the parking lot, that they go back and they replace some of the green space around it. And now that I can see that, you know, that's been addressed, that was one of our main concerns. Another one was that while we understand that, you know, the need for parking and to get parking out of the residential neighborhoods, the elimination of affordable housing was a little bit tough for us as well, but we understand that as part of it. But we can hope that the city might work with either LMH or some other entity to go ahead and replace that housing in our neighborhoods so that people would be able to go ahead and afford to live. Additionally, LMH and Burt Nash, we realize that parking is going to be an issue, and we would hope they would get together with the city as well for long-term solutions so that we don't have to go ahead and piecemeal it, like piece by piece for a while. And on the last one, I do see on the plan with the Arkansas Street, on Main, we don't necessarily, it doesn't really look like an issue because it's right across the street from a medical park as well. But on Arkansas, it's right across the street from a residential neighborhood. So if we could have some sort of verification or some sort of assurance that the residents on Arkansas won't be as disrupted as much as possible, because they are a part of Pinckney, and we want to be partners with the hospital, but we all want to work together. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wish to speak?
Hi, I'm Pat Miller. I'm speaking as an individual, but I also attend the Pinckney neighborhood meetings. So first of all, the hospital has been a very good partner to the neighborhood, and we appreciate that. But there is always a tension between enough parking, not only with the hospital, but with all of the other medical facilities in that area, and us having a viable neighborhood where we can continue to walk. I call it the medical corridor, runs all the way up Main Street mostly, and there are medical facilities starting at 6th Street, at 5th Street, and all the way on up to 3rd Street. There's the city water treatment plant right there in that same area, and if you go through the Pinckney neighborhood during any normal business day, there are cars everywhere. in the neighborhood. So I want to really emphasize what Bart has already said, that this needs to be a global solution to parking. You know, this may solve LMH's problems now, but I am fully sure that there will be more parking issues. We have emphasized that it'd be great to have a parking garage to serve multiple facilities in this area. I just want to make sure that this is on the city's list of things to do, that we need to not just have parking lots through that medical corridor, but it still has to be a neighborhood. So, thanks.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to visit with us on this? Okay, we'll invite the applicant up to maybe address some of those concerns that were voiced.
This is be the easiest one to look at. I understand the concern on Arkansas Street with parking going the opposite direction. That is the new, what I'll call the new concept. They use it in Colorado and other biking communities, where you actually back into the space so that it's easier for when you would drive away, you can look up and down the street and drive. If there's a bicyclist coming, you can see them coming. That was a recommendation that came out of the city. I mean, we had first showed it the other way, and they requested us to do that. So that is, and we turned it, and I know it's the first in this community, but we're not, right now the big picture is put the parking lot in, the larger parking lot. The on-street parking may not happen until next year. It all depends on how this works out for the hospital on this. If they don't need to add more parking, they won't. I mean, that's what their goal is, and you know, keep spending money on parking. So, and like I said, we heard it several times, and they would like to see a master plan between Burt Nash, the hospital, and then, you know, everybody about what's going on in community center and that whole thing, and how we get parking there.
All right.
That's kind of, we're just one entity. There's a couple more entities there that
Sure.
we have to deal with. So hopefully that answers everybody's questions. So anything else you can think of?
Okay, we'll let you know if we have any more questions.
All right.
Thanks, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll bring it back up to the commission for discussion. Commissioner Monaghan?
I'm not sure who to address this to, the applicant or Sandy. But I'm kind of interested in the landscape buffer between the two remaining houses and the parking lot. And I was hoping to see something in our packet or up here that would specifically show us what that would look like. When you drive by now, the further south house, the house on the south side, while I understand it will remain pretty much as it is in terms of the surrounding parking, it sits well below the parking lot on the south side. And while there's a fence, it's so low it doesn't seem to do much buffering. And there's nothing on the parking lot side. There's no plantings or anything that would divide that southern parking lot, you know, just south of that one of those two remaining houses. And I'm wondering, while that is not specifically the part of the parking lot we're looking at, it does seem that we need to,
Oh, you're talking about?
you know, the furthest south house,
Where
there's,
the retaining wall is.
yes, there's a retaining wall, but there's no visual buffering between the parking lot on the south side and that house, on the south side of the house.
Yeah, I can't remember that retaining wall is right on the property line.
And I'm just wondering if there's any plans to go in and add some vegetation in there. You know, the parking lot is up, what, 5 feet or something from the
5 or
ground
6
level
feet.
of the house. And it's rather stark.
Yeah, you're talking about right there.
Yes.
Yeah. And there may not be enough room between the retaining wall and that property line.
There's not. I think it would have to be, I mean, I'm not sure what would have to go
I mean,
there.
you might be able to put something on, plants on top of the retaining wall and then let it bleed over the top of the wall, like a junipers or some sort of vine or something like that, maybe. That might soften it. I see what you're saying. I mean, I'm not against it. I just don't know. I'd have to look at it and study it a little bit.
And then how about the other house, on the north side of the other house?
On the north side, you're talking about between this parking lot, the new
Yes.
parking lot and that, yeah,
Yes.
we've added plant material, both shrubs and understory trees there to screen all that.
Okay, but you are looking at that.
We can look at that other,
Okay.
yes, south of there.
It's a very stark.
Stark wall right there.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean,
A second question I have is how many parking spaces will be gained by adding that parking lot where the houses were?
118, I believe, is what we get.
Okay.
Wasn't that what it was? No. I think this was just 118.
It says 94.
I mean, 94.
94.
I know it changed a little bit there between 94. Okay,
Okay.
sorry, 94.
Thank you.
Just about individual lot on
Thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Just have a question for the applicant. How many spaces would be added in what you're referring to as phase 2 for the on-street parking? How many spaces would you add with that?
I mean, it's
Around 80,
80-something total.
80, 84, 86 total spaces that's shown in the diagonal parking. There, we can only estimate how much on-street parking is there, so there maybe is half that today with just the parallel parking along the curb.
Okay, but with the angled parking, you get
You-
within 10 spaces of what you're adding parking.
You'd probably, yeah, probably.
Yeah.
And then I had another question. Your rendering of what the parking lot is going to look like, I didn't see any lighting. Are you anticipating lighting in there, and what thoughts have there been about that?
Yeah.
And the impact on the houses right across the street?
Right, it's LED lighting, and there's a photometric plan we've got. There's gonna be a light pole there and one there. There's only 2 light poles in that whole lot. And it'll be per city, 0 when it gets to Michigan, and 0 when it gets to Third, and the same thing to the south.
They pointed back towards the parking lot.
Yeah. And that always, yeah, I understand when you do a photometric plan, you're only doing what's horizontally. That has nothing to do with what you can actually see of the light. That does not, just to tell the neighbors and everybody, you may still be able to see that light. That doesn't mean the 0 doesn't mean that you can't see that light bulb or the glare or stuff like that. Scott and I have been working on that with another project.
I might just, if I might on that one. Sometimes it's a field meeting we have to have, or several of them,
Yeah.
to determine, because it's oftentimes, and I'm not sure if this is the time where the topography gets the light above what would be reasonably normal in a situation where everything's flat. So when that happens and the lights are too tall, we make a judgment out in the field before occupancy or final permits or inspections are made, and work with them. There's a lot of different shieldings and things that we found work to reduce the direct glare issue.
We can put it on horizontal, say what the foot count would be, but that doesn't mean it's still light, may not be shining so much bedroom or
I
something.
understand, I know you
So-
have to have lighting because of
Yeah,
safety
yeah.
issues after dark. It's just, I wonder what,
Yeah.
making
Yeah,
sure the.
Staff is real good about working with us to figure out how to calm the neighbors down around that, on that kind of stuff. So,
I have a question for the applicant. Can you walk us through the additions, changes that have been made to the hospital over the past? It seems like I drive by there a lot, so it seems like every time I drive by there, there's a big change to the emergency area, and there was a big change to the south of the hospital. Can you just give us some ideas of that kind of growth and how that impacted your need for parking? I'm trying to make the connection of, we've added capacity probably to the hospital, and that added the need for parking. And then I'll ask staff, did we add parking when we added those additions? So,
yeah.
okay.
We actually, I mean, I would say mid-90s is when that started. And when we did that addition around the shelter house, we added that parking lot there. And then also the doctor's parking lot was changed. When they did the MOB building, then they redid the parking across. This was a one-way parking lot at one time, and they widened that and added this one at that time, and the MOB was put in there. They've also, in the past, restriped and redid this one between that time period. And then, within the last, I'd say 4 years, they did we vacated the right of way on Arkansas Street, and then it was decided to put ankle parking along there. So that's kind of a, in that same time period, they also put the garage. I forgot when we did that one. It was about the same time we did the emergency room. We did a garage down here and added that parking lot too at the same time. I can't give you the exact timelines, but every time it happens, we come back to this thing and look to see where we can find more parking.
So Sandy, your answer was yes. Thank you.
Every time we've added structure.
Yeah.
And so then it sounded to me from your presentation that the city code requires much fewer parking spaces. So tell us how many fewer parking spaces, and why is the city code so off on its metrics, it would seem like, for hospital parking?
When I was working with some of the math last night, and I think the total required parking, if we look at just the beds and the medical office use and discount, I think the required parking is probably around 200 total parking spaces. I think anyone who has been to that site would say that is not near enough. We have a use that has a number of shift changes. You have staff, you have patients, clients, but then you have also other facility use that on my lunch hour I can go in and go use the treadmill or some other elements like that to the facility. I don't know what the right number is. I think anecdotally, and we heard from even some of the neighbors, there is an overflow parking happening in the neighborhood. So, I mean, we can certainly research other communities and look at similar size facilities with similar operations and get an idea, but
Yeah, just certainly makes it
That's-
hard to plan when
that,
we're
this
off
is
by
a
that
weird one,
much, yeah. Other questions, comments? I'll get the ball rolling if we think maybe it'll spring up some more questions. Go ahead. Yeah.
The statements that are journal were all in a letter from the hospital to us as part of our packet. There's a statement that with this additional parking, don't anticipate a need for additional future parking because of going mostly to outpatient services off campus. So I'm struggling with, where you want to take down 6 houses to put in 10 more spots than you can by just restriping the streets with angled parking. So why do we want to take down 6 houses and put in more impermeable surface, although it says it'll be permeable pavers, if you don't anticipate an increase in use? I mean, an increase in need of parking over in the future. Why do we need a parking lot right now?
If staff, or I'll just say city engineer is they'll do angle parking, but that's not what, because that maintenance ends up being the city's maintenance. This parking lot is LMH's maintenance.
Okay, well, the city's got a big stake in the hospital, I think.
Well, I understand that, but it still comes out of somebody's budget to go in there and put that asphalt, the curb and gutter. All that ends up coming out of the city budget to maintain snow removal. They'll probably still do it by the hospital, but I'm just saying that is a big factor the city has to then look into to figure out how to do that. I'm not trying to, but just to say, yeah, we should just go ahead and do this on street. The other thing, the street is for the street to get through, to go from one point to another. You do not need, especially we've shown it on the emergency side, but there is some real safety concerns, and city staff would tell you, angle parking around that emergency is not what you need if someone's going there because of a loved one sitting in the emergency. You don't watch somebody to back out of a parking spot. I mean, we've shown it because we someday might have to do that. That's not our first choice. And that's the main thing, is that it's not. Angle parking for streets, downtown, great, you're doing 15 miles an hour. Maine, 30 mile an hour time. Arkansas, 30 mile an hour, and they will do 30. So it is a safety factor. I understand the affordable housing, but I think if someone's backing out, and
I also think safety factors, those are things that there's ways to slow down traffic also. So, I don't think just a blanket statement that people are going to go fast because it's a through street between 2 places is very persuasive. I mean, there are ways to slow down traffic.
I understand
in
that,
addition
there
to-
is,
to
but-
doing the other, so. I'm just trying to get my head, I mean, we got communications that say we don't anticipate an additional need for parking in the future by additional building by the hospital. And, I mean, you don't talk about Bert Nash expanding or anything like that. I'm assuming you're saying that's Bert Nash's problem. But we're hearing from the neighborhoods, this is, the whole thing together is a problem. So I'm just wondering if 92 spaces, in this one spot is really going to solve the issues. I mean, it sounds like for the hospital it might, but for the neighborhoods, because we're looking at an increased use in that area from other uses. Is that a fair statement?
yeah, I mean, the county is trying to figure out what to do with their north of community, what they're going to do with up there, and how they're going to get their parking lot in there. I mean, they're working on those plans now. Bert Nash or community, I mean, that's why the neighborhood says they need to work, all 3 entities need to work together. The problem is, we have a problem now. We don't even know when that Bert Nash is going to expand that facility to the north.
Yeah, I also understand that the hospital owns these 66 properties. Do you
Yeah,
know
it's
how
always-
long they've owned these residences?
I don't know. Probably, I don't know.
The one on the longest, I believe, is 12 years.
Yeah.
12 years?
Some of them are definitely shorter.
So walk us through a little bit what other, besides just adding more surface parking lots, what other ideas did you walk through? I mean, I'm really hesitant. I mean, part of what we're trying to approve is an area plan, but it actually doesn't sound to me like it's an area plan because we've got Bert Nash you know, these other spaces that are in the area that don't, we've just said are not included in the area. And I'm struggling with that because I think when you go to that area, parking is a problem everywhere. So that means that we're not planning very well, which may be because we have the wrong numbers, or maybe we're not thinking about the uses of that space in the right ways. What other ideas did you come up with? I mean, have you talked about off-site parking for staff? Did you, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've gone, this isn't like this can't be the easiest avenue. Can you share what other ideas that you went through, maybe a little bit?
I mean, what they've done on site, they have asked all the employees to park as far away from the front door as possible. And their staff pretty much does that, and they've also used what I'll say the far east side where the medical, see, you've got several different ownerships there. I mean, they've ended up purchasing 2 other medical places, but on the other side of that, that's individual owns those. It's not city, county, or anybody. And they use part of that parking lot too. They've reached out to them to use part of that for their staff and everybody. It's just the way things have grown over the years. Even when we did the community health facility, we thought we had plenty of parking at that point in time. That one's, I've gone there a lot and it's full.
Yeah.
The building hasn't changed. Why it's full, I can't tell you. The uses inside have changed in the last, 10, 15 years. That just keeps revolving with more people. So I mean, they have tried, but where would you suggest to have, when you say off parking, the facility, the other medical facility at 6th and Main, that parking lot's full.
No, I'm more thinking about another site in town and busing staff over for a site change, or, I mean, I think.
So that's what I mean, but I can't even think of where we'd have an empty parking lot to bus them to. I mean, where
Yeah.
you're talking all the way out north of town?
And I guess yeah, I guess I don't really need all the details, but
No, I understand. I'm
But
just trying to figure out where.
I'm just sort of throwing it out for the commission's discussion. I'm sort of, this feels like a short-term solution to a long-term plan. And we're approving a plan, we're approving an adjustment to a plan, and I would feel more comfortable if I felt like this was a long-term solution rather than, well, let's knock down some houses, let's put a parking lot here, and if we still need more, we'll put in angled parking, which we've heard is not safe or maybe economically smart. That doesn't sound like good planning to me. That sounds like just trying to make it work, trying to wedge more spots into whatever land we have. I do understand that larger parking structures are expensive. I get that. I also know that they create less impervious space when we go up, and you know, what is our value as a community to go up in density? I mean, this is a version of parking sprawl is what this is. So, you know, we talk about wanting to be dense residentially and commercially. This seems to be moving away from being denser parking wise. And I understand there's a cost there, but I think there's also a cost to our community for continuing to let more and more asphalt roll away. As I looked at this plan, the person who's going to the hospital that's parking all the way on, I don't know quite the street, on Michigan Street and walking to the hospital, I surely hope they're in shape to walk there. So that's just part of my concern. I'll throw that out to start out.
And kind of along those lines, I have a question. In our report, it talks about the reconfigured angled on-street parking on Arkansas, and then it says that this arrangement may provide additional parking for residential uses, and that can, so is that hospital parking, or is it just general
It's general parking, it's in the right of way.
on-street? So we can't count on that necessarily to be part of the hospital parking?
No, we can't. It could be all the residences along there. But they'd use it now. All those are one-car driveways. So when we build that, I mean, and that's why the Orange Street parking is there. If you drive over there tonight, I bet you'll find 6 or 8 of them are there and been there since 5 o'clock.
And are those spaces counted towards the parking?
It's counted towards the parking. We're hoping we can use those during the day. Because 9 times out of 10, people are gonna be gone, but it's just still an educated guess. That's why saying that just build the angle parking doesn't help, you know, like you're saying, well, it's the same number, but it's not quite the same number. Because a lot of those could be used by the residents across the street, and there's nothing we can do about it, because they're, like I said, it's really not the hospital's parking. That is public parking for everybody to use.
Commissioner Britton?
And just some general comments that I thinking of while Chairman Kelly was talking. Most of what you said is kind of exactly what I initially thought when I first saw this on our agenda, and obviously saw it in the newspaper and things like that. There just is something gut level that tells you if you can avoid demolishing some buildings to put up a parking lot, then maybe you should avoid it.
Joni Mitchell's one?
Yep. You know, this is, I'm sure it's paradise to some people, but probably not exactly paradise since it's right next to another parking lot already. But, so I sort of start with that skepticism. I do think that the hospital has addressed the issues head on, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the idea that, you know, this is LMH is a, you know, nonprofit community hospital. We're not talking about some for-profit operation here that's trying to maximize the amount of money they can squeeze out of this. So, I mean, the needs of the hospital are our needs. So I appreciate the idea that if we can save $2.5 million or more by doing it one way versus another, then those dollars hopefully are going to be used in a way that truly benefits the community. You know, I also understand the idea that maybe they won't need more parking in the future, but then I hesitate to, how much stock can I put on that? Because if they need more parking in the future, they will be back asking for more parking in the future. And, you know, it's the same kind of, we'll just be hitting the same problem again. So back to Chairman Kelly's point of this just doesn't feel like good planning. I agree with that. And I feel like maybe, when was the hospital built? In like the 30s or something? I mean, it was a long time ago. That was maybe our time
For that.
to
Used to
do.
be where the shelter house is, that used to be the old original hospital.
Gotcha.
Just next to it, they tore it down when they built the MOB.
So it's a difficult situation because the tension is there, and I don't know that we'll have an opportunity to do. I mean, Patrick, you mentioned it feels like we're just trying to make it work and squeeze it in, and I think that may be exactly what we're the only thing that there is to do. So I have some sort of gut level hesitation about this, but I also don't know. I'm failing to see a better solution right now. I don't know. I'm certainly not decided on it at all, but I'm having a hard time figuring out something else that isn't build a big parking garage, which will, of course, have its own issues in terms of its effect on the neighborhood, but would avoid, you know, paving more surface area and hopefully, you know, localize maybe better the effects parking is having on the neighborhood.
There is plans, and we did them 10 years ago. Showed a parking garage on the west side and showed a 2-level. The problem is, all you gained was 50 stalls. You just got through paying $2.5–3 million for 2 levels. You can't go down. That soil doesn't allow you to go down, so I can't build a basement in this area. I gotta go up. So if I only go up 1 level for $3 million and I gain 50 stalls, it hadn't helped the parking. I gotta go up 2 levels. Well, now all of a sudden it's $4 million. Okay, now I've got my 100, but I'm now $4 to $5 million, and now these neighbors are gonna look at 3 levels of a parking garage. Now, granted, you can make them brick, you can make them look nice like we got down the street. but it just keeps adding huge dollars for that kind of impact that you'd like to see.
Commissioner Willie?
I'll say what I do like about it, and that's that, you know, as they've added building space and been required to add more parking, they've done so. This is actually separate, that they're just addressing a need that's both for that medical campus, but also for the neighborhood, that recognizing that though they've not been required to by city code for more parking spaces, that they are having an impact and impacting their clientele and trying to address that. So I would say, I think this is probably the best solution of the parking solutions that we can kind of imagine. So I think I'm going to end up in favor of it. It may not be what we would hope for a neighborhood to be having more parking lot space, but I think they've worked with the neighborhood, and I think the hospital is a part of the neighborhood and addressing concerns there also. I would also say I like that they've worked the pavers into it, so we have not quite the increase in impermeable space that we would otherwise have for the parking lot. I think they've done a good job with it and been willing to put in the green space and the screening that the neighborhood would want.
I have a question for the applicants as well, a few of them. Following up on the chairman's questions about what other options have you explored, I'd be interested in kind of the number of parking spaces that have been on the campus as a function of the number of employees that have been historically employed at the hospital over the last 15 or 10 years. The change in the number of employees and the change in the number of parking spaces. My understanding is that without the street angled parking, this new plan would bring the total to 1,222. Is that the correct? Or is that with the street parking? That was just with this.
I think this
That
is-
number is with the street.
Yeah.
So drop it by,
So over
About
200. So without the street, it would be
1,100.
yeah, 1,140 something. Okay. Did the hospital do any surveys of the staff? And yes, there are staff, I work at KU, we have faculty and staff who come and go at hours that are outside 8 to 6. But most of them, like at the hospital, are there during that time. I'm wondering if any survey has been done, data collection done to study where these staff members are coming from, whether carpooling can be encouraged, whether instead of making those employees park far away, somebody who had 2 people in their car would be able to park closer. 3, they could park even closer. Now that would require somebody to be at a toll booth or something to check them, but when I rode down there on my bicycle for a consult last week, I couldn't find a bike parking space anywhere on the west side of the building. But there were 3 valets out there, so I know they could probably have somebody sitting in a booth looking at the number of people in each car that came into the special carpool lot. Has any data collection been done about origins of the staff members who are working during first shift, let's say 8 to 6? Or has any thought been given to incentivizing carpooling among staff members?
I know that they encourage the staff members to park, try like the 4th and Michigan corner as far as they can, or like I said, on the far east side and the other lots on the east side. Now, whether it's carpooling or not, that one I don't know, that'd probably be up to. I understand what you're trying to do with the carpooling, and a lot of the nurses, they're there from, all of a sudden they do a double shift.
Oh, I know. I
And
know a lot of nurses. I know a lot of nurses.
So I don't know how you do a carpool and all of a sudden they're stuck because they're the other
Well,
person. So
some of those,
like
like I said,
people,
some of these staff members and
yeah,
well,
I'm not,
like other institutional entities in the city have unusual schedules.
yeah.
But most of the people there, just like at KU, work during the day. So I was just curious as to whether any data had been gathered to really demonstrate the need for this parking, or whether, are people just driving a mile and a half into work by themselves alongside hundreds of other people from near the same origin to the same location? Because that, to me, is not a need for more parking. That is too many people driving to campus problem.
And that's a,
That's a behavioral issue
that's a behavioral issue.
that we're
That's
not
a-
going to address in the planning commission or in the city, but we are going to encourage that kind of behavior with more parking. That's parking does. It doesn't generate traffic, but it certainly encourages it. And that may be a distinction without a difference, but that's a fact. KU is a prime example of that. More and more, USD 497 is an example of that. This is an example of that. And so what we have here is the number of people driving, and in our city, that's about 90% solo, is a problem. And I wanted to know whether any data had been collected to see what the nature of our driving habits are at the hospital.
I was gonna say,
Now, we've,
Can you step up to the mic?
go ahead.
I've been fighting up that wiring all day, so I'm gonna lean up against your, and I hate public speaking, so.
We just, it goes to television, so
Yeah.
that won't make it any
That
better, I
doesn't
know.
really help me.
Sorry.
People are watching.
Thank you for pointing that out. No, we haven't, I'm pretty new there, less than 2 years in the facilities department. And, thanks for pointing out all the TV.
Nobody watches, that's good.
So we've talked about ways to incentivize, for every one person that'll, I mean, we'll have the equal number of people that'll say, never change it, my vehicle's my freedom. I want the ability not to depend on my coworker who may have to work late or leave early or something. And so it's a real struggle. We're just, every day, we'll get clinics called to say, their patients are saying, I'm late to my appointment because I can't find a place. I had 6 meetings today. Every single one of them said, I'm sorry I'm late, I couldn't find a parking space. We did a parking study who said, you're close to what you need, but they didn't go out and figure out how many people are parking 2 blocks deep into your neighborhood. And so the larger lot was going to give a quicker solution for the people who today are upset because they couldn't get into the clinic on time. And we're just trying to minimize the frustrations of the folks who have a lot on their mind. And the last thing they need is also to be faced with, I couldn't get into that darn clinic and see my doctor because I couldn't find a parking spot. We have looked at different options. We looked at what would it be like if we made the Arkansas Street where I believe LMH owns it. What if we reconfigured that inside there and shut off the traffic down to Arkansas and Second? And we thought those people would not be very happy having to drive clear around there. But it would gain some space, and it would be staff space or patient space. We've tried to look. We were throwing around ideas about angle on-street parking. I said the same thing when I saw that backwards parking. I understood we were one of the newest concepts. I'm not sure if the hospital is the best place to try a new concept of parking because people got a lot on their minds other than, I also got to figure out how to back into there. Those would probably be staff, and all of this new area would be staff. We wouldn't make our patients walk a block and a half over there. But we have students, we have a wonderful community that has volunteerism like none other. So we have hundreds of volunteers that come in to give their time to escort and take you around and wheel you around in a wheelchair. And Allison just said we're going to get another 100 starting in June, another 100 junior volunteers. And in my mind, I'm like, where are they going to park? So we just have a very active, we're very fortunate we have it's a good problem to have, is we need more parking. And this is a place that we can get an immediate or a sooner than going through all the rigors of trying to figure out how that parking garage is going to fit and what are the, how it's going, how can it be engineered. We only put the angled parking on there because that was what if we do need it? And I think from our advice, they said, why don't you go ahead and put it on there and we'll just address it all right now and get your parking plan updated. Our administrator has said, we don't we don't want to add angle on-street parking. We hope that we're going to plateau. We're trying to be good neighbors. The Missouri Street is a one-way that goes up from our alleyway. We've told our staff there's only parking on one side, and the neighbors over there are saying, you're taking it all up with your staff. So we're constantly telling our staff, park far away, let our patients come close, because it hurts us when our patients can't get into their clinics and on time. So we haven't done a whole lot of study for carpooling and incentivizing. I've heard little rumors about, well, we tried that a long time ago and it didn't really work. We could certainly try to poll our staff.
I guess I would feel better about this plan if it came with some sort of description of a goal to change that behavior, to encourage people to carpool, or coordinating with transit to improve service. Something to alleviate the number of cars that are there. Yes, a patient who can't find a parking space, that's an issue.
Today.
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 That's
it is
an issue today.
And tomorrow, and Friday.
That's right.
and
That will always,
Tuesday,
if a patient can't
every
find a
day.
parking space,
Right.
that's always going to be an issue, today and forever. And the question is, why can't they find a space? Why? The reason is that staff is taking up the spaces. And if staff is also parking on the streets, then patients won't have those either. And so getting back to my point was, I would like to see a plan to help reduce the number of trips onto the campus. That would be a long-term solution.
Sure.
A permanent, ongoing, and progressive solution. 25 years ago, I lived in the city of Seattle, and I worked across the street from Swedish Hospital, one of the largest hospitals on the West Coast. And in that neighborhood, not only did Swedish provide all their own on-campus parking, in a garage, of course, but you were not able to park on the residential streets surrounding it without a residential permit between the hours of 7 and 5 or 6 p.m. That's how they solved that problem. That concept has come up without any, without serious consideration, but has been mentioned in this body and others in the past in Lawrence. But that is one possible solution to the problem of residential parking being taken up by staff at adjoining hospitals. The question then is, what do you do with that parking? You cram it onto campus. How do you do that? Well, do you have enough parking spaces? No. But if you're moving only cars with one person in them on campus, instead of people onto campus, we're going to keep having this problem. So I would like to see a better plan for this in the future. And this goes back to the comments of other commissioners who have said that this doesn't feel like a plan. This feels like a reaction and not a long-term solution. Reducing the number of car trips and inculcating a culture that encourages that is a long-term and sustainable solution. More parking will never be a sustainable solution for something like this. I would like to know the proportion of growth of employees, especially shift employees, especially first shift employees, and the number of parking spaces over time. I understand that information is not readily available tonight, so I'm not asking you for it here. But that would be of interest, I think, to examine whether that has kept up, whether the growth in parking has exceeded the number of employees, et cetera. And I know that so many new buildings and so many new projects and so many new clinics have sprung up on this campus, and I'm thankful for all of them. But we need to find a long-term solution for the problem, not just here, but in our school district and at KU, of institutional parking. It's a serious consideration. It's a burden for the city. It's a burden for the institutions themselves. And every time we put out another parking space, to get somebody there and maintain that street, our shoes and our food get more expensive. That's how it works. So we need to find a solution for that. That said, I appreciate the need that is here, and I appreciate the needs of the residents around this facility to have somebody deal with this parking problem. But I'm torn. because I don't feel like this is a long-term solution. I don't feel like it's a good plan, and I feel like it's a reaction to a short-term problem
I think
that is not really being addressed.
I think, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. Our administration has said they believe that it will stop at this point. I think they feel comfortable enough believing that they will stop at this point and not need to go to the on-street angle parking because of their strategy with moving things off of this campus into other locations that's going to reduce the need for that capacity. I thought I'd throw that out there one more
Yeah.
time just to make sure that was kind of clearly.
Just a point of order for our commissioners and our applicant. We need to make sure we ask questions of the applicant and don't get into a dialogue back and
Sure.
forth, and
I understand.
keep your responses to those questions. So I'll do a better job of monitoring that. Commissioner Von Auken?
I would just like to say, kind of in reference to some of the things that have been said, that I think a certain amount of the parking problems are a product of the hospital's own success, in that they're doing more and more programs all the time. They have clinics up there, classes up there, and these are just ongoing, daily, and those are all drawing people in. It's not just staff, it's not just patients, it's not just visitors, it's people going to these ongoing public education events that they have on a daily basis, which is good. So that, I'm sure that's part of it, and that would be a really difficult thing to figure out how much of our parking problems today are a result of that. But I know it has to be somewhat
Our
involved.
community and our patients need us. Our new way is for lifelong health. So it's not just when you have your broken arm or when you have cancer or when you have an acute health. It's to get that education from when you're a baby to when you're growing up and learning all the education things that we provide in the community to support opportunities that we can provide to try to help our community out. So it attracts a lot of people. Night before last, I ran into EMTs from Emporia who are coming up taking classes, advanced cardiac life support, that we offer classes for them, and emergency medicine, and just lots and lots of things are going to draw people to this, which builds a stronger level of support and service.
And you said you didn't like public speaking. Please wait for a question. You're doing great. Commissioner Colvin?
Just to make a few comments. The LMH being a huge community asset here is really important to our community, and other communities don't have that asset. And I think we have to keep that in mind throughout this. This is tucked into a neighborhood setting, and it's going to be difficult when you see the growth that we've seen at a local community hospital. How are they going to navigate that while they're cornered within a residential area? Although it does seem short-term to provide more surface parking, the hospital has taken a proactive approach to address some parking needs, not only for their facilities, but also for the residential neighbors in that area, to hopefully alleviate some of that pressure on the streets there for staff and patients who might be parking along those residential areas. Now, I do think it would be important going forward that we look at our metrics for parking with this type of use. I think we tried to piecemeal it the best we could, but I think there has to be some models out there that might help us a little bit more, because had not LMH taken the initiative to address this parking need, although it may be short-term, there's nothing in the code that would require them to at this point, because based on our metrics today, they're meeting the parking requirements. So I think there's an overarching concern there, or need going forward, that we need to look at. I wasn't aware of the structured parking and the inability to go down. That makes a lot of sense, because if you're trying to build upward with the structured parking, not only the cost, but also the setting that sets in a residential neighborhood when you're going multiple stories up is going to create its own issues. I do like the discussion about trying to bring together these related partners in this area to develop some planning for parking and facilities as things continue to expand. I think there's a great opportunity for all of those parties to be involved in a process and collaborate to try and address some of those things, because I only see this area becoming more and more utilized, and with the potential expansions that are available with Burton Ash and with the park up there a little further north, there's going to be needs for parking there, and I think that bringing those parties together to address some of that at that time will help us maybe provide a more long-term approach to some of the needs here. Again, this is a shorter-term solution, but there's an immediate need. And I do believe that this proposal will fit that immediate need in a way that has minimal consequences to the residential area. In fact, I hope that it alleviates some of the pressure that the off-street park or on-street parking is putting on the neighborhood at this point by adding this parking. And hopefully we don't have to go to where we're using the angled parking, but if need be, it's available. So.
Commissioner Britton?
Question for staff. Obviously, we've been talking about a lot of this sort of from the perspective of the hospital, and there are lots of economic and practical concerns there that are real and unavoidable, but I'm just wondering, in your experience, I don't know, going to planning conferences and things like that, I mean, if money weren't an issue here, would we be looking at something else? Like, what would be like the first and ideal suggestion for something like this? I mean, is a parking garage the thing that you really want here from a planning perspective, or is there no good answer? I mean, that's
Yeah. From my perspective, I think the discussion is great. It always is by you all, because it's a lot about context. And in an urban setting, you might find garages. Commissioner Struckhoff talked about a very urban setting that prohibited residential parking. Well, you have to put it in structures. And a lot of hospitals, you get a certain size and you do that. This hospital, for my 10 years here in Lawrence, has been trying to right-size their parking issue every time they come into the meeting, as have other medical office buildings in the area. We usually don't talk about growing their buildings. It's about how to get more parking in the area. And though you're right that it's sort of the whole district, kind of the medical district, if you will, they are individual site plans. And clearly, any new building intensity will need to address parking. Not only their parking, but better the parking, improve it if possible. So I think from my perspective, the hospital has been trying to find the right balance between how much parking they need, how much is enough. And I would urge you as a land use body to sort of think about it from a land use perspective, a lens of looking at the boundary, the hospital boundaries and its impact into the neighborhood. It's already into this block, for example, that we're looking at. Clearly there's a point where you say, that's as far as we want the hospital to penetrate the residential uses. And I think a big question tonight is, have they reached that point yet? I'm not sure, frankly, that it's within your scope to address necessarily how they're addressing their demand, although I think it is, because it's a planning issue. Commissioner Struckhoff's discussion about, are we doing enough with parking and behavior modifications? But I think most of us will agree at this particular site, the fact is people are parking in the residential streets today. In fact, from my perspective, I would urge the hospital to go ahead and put in the on-street parking, because I think it will help the residents in the area provide parking for their visitors when they come into town and such. I think we need more parking, not less here, and due to the fact that there's just an obvious parking need here. As we evolve into different kinds of transportation, that may all change. We're trying to improve it with more bike parking, different kinds of bike parking, more usable, better locations as well, trying to get pedestrian and rec needs met here to make it more accessible from all modes of transportation. But the fact remains that it's auto-based industry, and right now they have a need and a demand, and so that's my perspective.
Sandy, you mentioned earlier the request to reduce the number of bike parking places, and our letter said that that was also your recommendation, and it was lower than the plan had initially suggested. Can you explain why you were willing to?
Sure. And it goes back to the many different types of people that have the hospital as the campus as a destination. In many instances, patients are not going to be biking to the facility. Clients, somebody on their lunch break, employees, some of that shift work, those individuals account for a portion of that parking demand as well. So we think that, and it's maybe a professional guess, that we're saying 70% of the required bicycle parking seems reasonable based on what we're seeing. The extension of the loop, providing bicycle parking at a reasonable scale, but usable bicycle parking, and getting it properly located throughout the campus. We think that not only having areas designated for employee staff bicycle parking, but other people coming to the facility as well. Hopefully that will add that additional efficiency as well as option for maybe some of that reduced traffic.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I would also note that the city's doing a parking study for downtown and KU and neighborhoods in between. It's ironic, the timing, that the consultant noted that our zoning code, I haven't broke this to Sheila yet, so she doesn't know, she's got some research to do on this parking issue. But he noted some ratios that were off, but were pretty general in this draft study. So I asked, I said, well, give me an example. Hospital. We didn't go into any detail, but that's clearly one that struck our consultant as being not right. And so, as Sandy said, when we're talking about vehicles with so many various types of uses, even when you say office use, well, is that packing people through a lab and quick blood draws or something, or is that more like back room office stuff? You've got all of that in a hospital. So capturing that in a code may be challenging, but we do have some work to do on the hospital parking ratio in the code.
Have a general comment. I mean, like Commissioner Britton said, my first reaction is tear down house to put up a parking lot seems at a gut level. There's something disagreeable with this. Now, I know we're probably looking at what the best short-term solution is, but everyone's presenting we need longer-term solutions also. But I think part of what also bothered me when I started thinking about it is the hospital has bought up these properties over the last decade or so because our code says on-site parking or within 200 feet. So you buy up a property to create off-site parking. And in this case, because it's adjacent, now it's a request to extend the zoning and redraw our lines to gobble up another part of this neighborhood. So I think what Scott was saying about where do you draw a line in encroachment into the neighborhood, I think maybe this is the line. This road is the line, because they've pretty much taken this street, and now we have two residences, one owned by the city, that are essentially on an island surrounded by parking lot. And great, come get into our public housing and live in a parking lot is kind of what we're saying with one of those houses. So there's a lot of things that just kind of bother me, and that this is more of a policy question that we can't address here tonight, but it's just trying to get this out for, maybe the city commission will pick up on something here as we start looking at this, that we have some issues with how we talk about parking and what, and really permitting off-site parking in the first place. Now, we have another issue coming up tonight that I know I'm going to bring this up again, and I'll do it at that time. But right now, I think we have some larger issues in general about parking that the city needs to address, and I'm glad we're having a parking study, and perhaps part of that will be about the requirements of on-site versus within 200 feet versus can I buy a property and just knock down whatever's there to put up a surface parking lot of all things, which just like was mentioned here is really parking sprawl. So how much of that are we going to have? So those being said, that's just some general comments just to get on the record. And I don't know where we are here tonight. Maybe we're up there trying to form what our opinions are on this particular plan.
You know, I think we're, having gone to the APA convention, I think we're at a tipping point, and we're sort of feeling that right now. I mean, we heard a lot at the convention about what's the future of transportation, whether it's driverless cars or how, you know, and all that stuff seems to go to the coasts and come central, so we're good to build a surface parking lot right now. We're not going to have driverless cars by the time they get that happening. But I think it does beg a question again and again of what is our relationship with parking? And that goes back to what Commissioner Struckoff was saying. What's our relationship with cars, you know, and how we get around? And I think we have aspirations towards that, and getting there is difficult. I recognize and want to make sure the Lawrence Memorial Hospital is truly an asset of the community. And I agree with Commissioner Von Auken that part of the reason they're having this problem is because they're good at what they do, and people are coming from long distances to use the hospital, and that's fantastic, and that's probably why we have so many cars there. And I think our increased understanding of mental health is an example of why Bert Nash is looking to expand, and that the services are different. We also have a tremendous asset downtown, and I hear it called an asset over and over again. What an amazing thing downtown is. And we have to figure out parking downtown. And we've been building parking up downtown to deal with that problem. And we're not buying surface lots. We're not buying homes downtown to create surface lots. We're trying to alleviate people parking in the neighborhood by building up. I don't have the solution here. I don't love this solution, and we'll probably vote against it just so that the city commission knows that I think we need to think about a longer term plan for this area, because I think this, while I appreciate we're done with parking lots, I have a feeling if I turn it on 10 years from now, we're talking about parking lots again in this space. That's just what happens. I mean, I'm sure that the phrase "we're done with parking lots" has been said before. So I think we need to continually, as a commission, I appreciate what Scott says, is it in our right? But I think it's an important discussion to continually have is, what do we think about parking and how does it influence? We use parking to determine how many people live in a building. We use parking to determine whether you're downtown or not. I mean, that has been our motivator for so many ways we plan this community. And is that right or is that wrong? I don't know, but I think that's what makes the discussion worthwhile and something for us to continually wrestle with. Has anybody got a motion? I'm interested in that. Commissioner Von Auken, you don't have to have a motion.
I went into this project, I was wishing this was going to be on next month's agenda. But it's not, it's here. And I just want to say, as we've all expressed, I think we're so lucky to have this hospital here. It's a gem, and it's a community hospital. And I know through personal experience they do, really good work. And while none of us like the idea of tearing down houses to build surface parking. I think it's clearly the reality where we are right now that we need more parking, and this, at least for now, is that there's just no other options that anybody can see. And so I will support this application, and if you want, I can make that into a motion. Okay. I move that we recommend approval of the special use permit institutional development plan for Lawrence Memorial Hospital and related parking lot expansion, and forwarding this request to the City Commission with a recommendation of approval, subject to the listed conditions as well as the amended condition.
Thank you. Second, Commissioner Britton seconds. Any further discussion? Commissioner Willie?
This is one of those items that I was glad to have a lot of discussion on, and glad that we were probably not putting forth a unanimous vote, because I feel like the City Commission will benefit from all of the discussion that occurred. I was especially interested in hearing what Commissioner Struckoff had to say when I first looked at this item on our agenda. I will vote in support of it, but I recognize all of those cultural difficulties that we have with parking are going to be something that we are not going to get away from as we piecemeal these parking solutions together. There's going to come a time when we have to have a more community approach to what we do. I think this may not be the time with the hospital. I think it's an immediate need. So I'll be voting for the motion.
Commissioner Britton?
I hesitate to compare anything that goes on here with something that goes on in Topeka. But this kind of reminds me of, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. And I think I agree with Commissioner Struckoff that ultimately we don't have a parking problem, we have a driving problem. And so I really encourage the City Commission, hopefully reading our minutes and seeing how we're struggling with this, to think long-term how we can address our driving problem, which really does, it also drives so much of what we do from a planning perspective. So I agree with the comments that have been made there. But ultimately, I think that this is the solution that exists, and want to see Lawrence Memorial Hospital continue to succeed and to be a good neighbor. I applaud them for coming forward with this at this time and not being forced into it by a change in the code as it relates to hospitals and those kinds of things. So I appreciate that, and although it feels short-sighted to do it, I think that it is still the right thing to do. So I appreciate again the fact that it'll probably be a divided vote, but I will vote in support.
Commissioner Struckoff?
I also appreciate the hospital's proactivity on this issue, and the statements from the president of the neighborhood association confirm the work that the hospital has done. I will be supporting this resolution, but we need to do something about the problem, as Commissioner Britton described, the driving problem. On an institutional level, we can do something about this. We can do something about this. And we must. It's not a matter of, it's not a matter of anything except affordability. We can't afford to continue our institutional parking splurges. And this isn't a splurge. This is a small amount. It's unfortunate that we're tearing down these houses to do this, and that we're cutting our affordable housing stock, et cetera. But these are solvable problems, and it's important that the institutions find a way to address them, and it will require some investigation up front, surveys, data. Where are people starting to drive? Where are they starting from? Pick an intersection. Are you starting near it? Who lives within 5 blocks of you that works with you? That sort of thing. We need to identify these drivers and then encourage them, at the minimum, to carpool. Not everybody's going to want to walk. Nobody wants to walk in the rain. Nobody wants to walk when it's cold, let alone ride their bike. Yes, people need their cars individually for special schedules, on-call staff, things like that. Patients, of course, I'm not even talking about patients, I'm talking about staff. And so that is something we're going to have to address, and we have to address it at the institutional level. And so I would like to see a concerted effort, a goal-driven effort, and a declared intent to reduce the number of car trips, especially single occupancy car trips, onto our institutional campuses in this city. Having said that, I will support this motion.
Anyone else before we vote? Commissioner
I
Carpenter?
just want to commend the hospital for working so hard on this and trying to address the needs of the neighbors and meeting with the neighborhood association on more than one occasion. And I really want to thank the neighborhood association for showing up here tonight to express their views and to send a letter about how they feel about this. This is a larger problem in the Pinckney neighborhood, and it's because we have public institutions right in the middle of the neighborhood, which have increasing needs and increasing success, as been stated here tonight. I know I've been in multiple meetings in the meeting rooms in the hospital, and everybody's grateful that those are available for the public to use. And I know there are lots of trainings going on there, and I know that's part of the traffic. I do think that we have some policy issues I hope the city commission will look at, and about off-site parking and these things. And so I think I'm going to be one of those no votes, just to have that as we have some other issues here. I think what we're looking at is probably the best that we're going to come up with as a plan for the short term. So my vote is not exactly against your plan, it's more against, we need to let the people that we're making recommendations to know that we've identified some larger issues in this area, and they apply to downtown and citywide, and just in general, and there's the things that should probably be considered. So that's really my no vote.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Passes 6-2. Kelly and Carpenter voting no. Next item. Keep going, Penny.
Okay. I recommend that we approve, that we recommend approval of the request to rezone approximately 1.38 acres from RS5 Single Dwelling Residential District to Hospital District based on the findings presented in the staff report, and forwarding it to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
Second, Commissioner Willie. Any discussion on this one? All those in favor signify by raising your hand. All those opposed? Passes 6-2. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute, 6-minute break here. It's actually a 6, not a 5. And we will come back at 8:20 for item number 2.
they're reminiscing, looking around, oh, it's so long here.
Okay, back in session here. We're gonna move on to item number 2, which is at 1705 North 1399 Road, or 1399 in Kansas speak. We're going from agriculture to I-3. Hi, Becky.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Becky Pepper. I'm with the Planning Department. Our subject property is located southeast of the City of Lawrence city limits. It is shown here, the red star. It is bounded to the north by 23rd Street and to the south by East 25th Street. The subject property is zoned agricultural, as are the properties to the east and south. The properties to the west that are in the county are zoned industrial. I-2 is light industrial and I-3 is heavy industrial. And then the surrounding properties that are located within the city limits are zoned various industrial zonings. This slide here shows the development around the subject property. On the south side of East 25th Street, we have the Douglas County Jail, the Lawrence Community Center, the Douglas Public Works Facility, and KDOT facility. North of East 25th Street are storage facilities. There is an asphalt and concrete plant. And then north of 23rd Street, it's Venture Park Properties and East Hills Business Park. This is our subject property, which, as mentioned, is in the county and zoned A. It is adjacent to the properties to the west of it are under the same ownership as is this property here. So this property that is outlined in red is all under the same ownership. The subject property is not used for agricultural uses today. In fact, it's used for the storage of excavation materials, which is a non-conforming use under the agricultural district. And one thing I wanted to note is that these 3 properties are within the county. This third R.D. Johnson-owned property is located within the city, and staff did have conversations with the owner about annexing the county properties at this time, but the intended use of the subject property does not need municipal services, so it was determined that annexing the properties was not necessary at this time. And then before we leave this slide, I wanted to note that there are some rural residential uses here, here, and here. The rezoning request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Chapter 7 of Horizon 2020 does provide guidance for future industrial development. It notes the southeast area and southeast industrial area, which includes our subject property. And the plan does note that there are industrial areas uses in this area, and that they anticipate that those industrial uses will expand in the future. And it recommends that the industrial uses in that area be more intense industrial uses. And then there is an area plan that encompasses the subject plan, the southeast area plan. This purple indicates the properties that are intended future use of industrial, and this is our subject property here. So staff recommends forwarding the rezoning application to the Board of County Commissioners with a recommendation for approval based on the findings listed in the staff report.
Thank you, Becky. Do you have an applicant or a representative of the applicant?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Patrick Watkins. I'm an attorney. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. Although I don't look like an attorney tonight, we had a last-minute scheduling conflict with the engineer who was supposed to cover, and so I got pulled away from a personal matter. So I apologize for the overly casual look, but I wanted to be here to answer any questions you all have. This rezoning is to bring the property into conformance with the plan, the comprehensive plan. I appreciate staff's hard work on this, and we seem to be in agreement on everything. If you have any questions for the applicant, I'd be happy to do my best to respond.
Thank you. Anyone from the public here to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, bring it up to the commission for questions, discussion, and motions.
Has there been any communication with or from the property owner immediately to the east, in between this property and the traffic way?
Other than notification, we have not, that property owner has not reached out to staff. We haven't received any phone calls or emails from that property owner.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Walnachen?
Becky, could you put the slide up of the aerial view, please? Okay, now you see the subject property, and then you go west, and this belongs to the same owner. Then you go west again, go above, you just did down, right there. Can you tell me what that property is zoned and if it's being used legally?
It is zoned A for agriculture, and it is a non-conforming use under that zoning.
Because it's a car dump right now.
A salvage yard, yes.
Okay, that sounds better. And that's non-conforming, so is
Under that
that,
zoning
is that considered a legal non-conforming?
Yes. A legal non-conforming use,
And,
correct.
and how did that come about? Does,
It's been in existence since before 66.
okay, so it's just kind of
Because,
grandfathered in?
because it was there before the county adopted zoning.
Okay,
And I think there was an attempt to zone that to a legal use, and that zoning was denied.
Right.
huh, okay, thank you.
More questions, more discussion, more motions?
So to make the comment that I suppose everyone knows, this is the old town site for the town of Franklin that no longer exists, that was disassembled and the buildings taken into Lawrence after the burning of the city of Lawrence. So that's why there's no longer a Franklin, Kansas on this road, but it had both sides of the road where the subject property is. I don't know if that was commonly known or not. That aside, I think that the industrial use is very appropriate in this area, and I think that kind of this general area will continue to expand in that way, and I think it's an appropriate rezoning at this time.
Commissioner Britton?
Well, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being like on the planning commission in like Cologne, Germany or something? Everything would be like, well, this was the site of.
Did you want to make a motion? Or
No,
did you have a
I want to. I'm going to draw
Just like
this
your
out as
stand-up
long as
routine.
possible. This meeting is going to go all night. I just.
Staff did not like that, by the way.
Right. Well, my next comment was going to be, I just can't believe there was a time when the county didn't have zoning. Well, anyway, I agree with those comments, and I was just going to move that we recommend forwarding the rezoning request for approximately 26.995 acres from A to I3 to the Board of County Commissioners with the recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact found in the body of the staff report.
Commissioner Pulver, second. Any further discussion?
I'll vote in favor of this, but because I was close to not, because Patrick was not dressed appropriately.
Very
But
disrespectful.
I'm going to overlook that and vote for this. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Passes unanimously, 8-0.
Can you tell by our dress which ones are pure attorneys?
Thank you, Patrick. I really hope the city commission will address that issue.
Yes.
Or the county commission. Glad we had that discussion.
Okay, moving on to item number 3, a PRD to RM15 at 2115 Exchange Court. Hi, Catherine.
Yes. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Catherine Week. Get used to saying that because my name changed since last time you saw me. I'm here to present a rezoning request for you. This is a similar one to what you saw about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago. The request from the applicant is to change from PRD zoning to RM15, which is a more conventional zoning at this time. This is actually in the same area for the one that you saw a little over a year ago. This is where the new Bethel Estates is currently being developed, which is just south of the subject property we're talking about tonight. This is at the intersection of O'Connell Road and East 23rd Street, just off to the southwest. Originally, there was a PRD for this area, which is a planned residential development district. It was approved in 2006. It was not developed as a PRD, and the larger tract, this was part of the larger tract, including that piece to the south, has since zoned to RM15, which is more conventional zoning. And this applicant is asking for same zoning to bring it into a more conventional zoning similar to what is there currently. And as you can see in the area, there is a little multifamily to the west, RM12D, which is currently developed as existing duplex units. There's additional residential further to the west. There is community commercial to the east and commercial to the north and east corner there. And those are still vacant. They are currently vacant at this time. Some of the key points, this is again at the southwest corner of K10 Highway and O'Connell Road, or East 23rd Street. I guess it's not K10 Highway anymore, actually. That kind of swerves to that. This maintains the maximum density. We are not increasing density with this change. The original PRD was planned to have 15 dwelling units per acre, and that is what this is going to as well. So it's RM15. This would permit development consistent with the previously approved final development plan, which has since expired. So we're not really changing what was previously approved. They're proposing to do something, not at this time, but in the future that would be similar to what was approved in that original FDP. And this brings the remainder of the larger tract into the same zoning district as the previously rezoned parcel. The review criteria when we look at these are the suitability of the subject property for the uses to which it has been restricted in the current zoning, which this one addresses by keeping that same density, that it conforms to the future plans for the area, which it does conform to the comprehensive plan, the length of time the subject property has remained vacant as it's zoned, which has been since it was approved as the FDP, it still remains vacant. So with all of these factors in mind, staff is recommending that you recommend approval of the rezoning request and from PRD to RM15 and forward that to the City Commission with a recommendation of approval.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
You may have some.
Okay.
Is the applicant or a representative of the applicant here?
Good evening, Paul Warner Architects. I think Catherine covered everything. Seems pretty straightforward. That's all I got. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any member of the public here to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll bring it up to the commission for questions. There's no questions. Motions are acceptable. Commissioner Struckoff.
I move that we recommend approval of the rezoning request from PRD to RM15, forwarding it to the City Commission with that recommendation.
And a second from Commissioner Von Auken. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Passes 8-0. On to item number 4. Thank you, Catherine. Final development plan for 2350 and 2400 Franklin Road.
This item takes us back to, is in the same area we've been discussing. It is southeast Lawrence, south of 23rd Street, and east of Franklin Road. The final development plan contains 2 lots. This property was part of the Mount Blue Planned Industrial Development that was approved by the City Commission in 1997 under our previous zoning code. That code dictates that the preliminary development plan is approved by the City Commission and the final development plan is approved by the Planning Commission. So that's why it's before you tonight. Under our current code, this would be an administratively approved project. The preliminary development plan was brought to the Planning Commission on March 15th and unanimously recommended for approval. And then the preliminary development plan was approved by the City Commission on April 18th. The proposed final development plan accommodates a gun range with a retail store and a classroom inside the building. The retail store will contain guns and related merchandise. Here we've got the approved preliminary development plan and the proposed final development plan, and highlighted faintly, I apologize, are the 2 minor changes, 2 minor differences between the two. The proposed final development plan adds an 1,100 square foot patio, but there are no changes to the size of the building. And then there was detention that is added the southeast corner of Lot 1. Staff recommends approval of the final development plan based on the findings in the staff report and subject to this, the conditions that are listed in that staff report. I want to note that the 3rd condition listed on the staff report was the submittal and approval of an erosion control plan. Prior to our completion of the staff report, that erosion control plan has been submitted and approved, so that's why that's been struck through. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Is the applicant here or representative of the applicant?
Hi, Letitia Cole, Paul Werner Architects. I don't really have anything to add, but I'm here in case anybody has any questions.
Thank you. We might bring it back up to the commission. Does anyone have any questions? Commissioner Britton?
I move that we recommend approval then?
No.
Or we are actually?
We're the approving body.
Okay. Okay. I think the report says,
Oh,
planning staff. Planning staff recommends. I just need to read the words and understand them. I
This
move
is your
that.
first meeting.
Yeah, I'll get it. I'll get the hang of it. I move that we approve the revised final development plan for Mount Blue Addition based on the findings of fact presented in the body of the staff report and subject to the 2 conditions then, just the 2, the condition 1 and condition 2 listed in the staff report.
Commissioner Britton's motion, Commissioner Struckoff seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Passes 8-0. Our final item is an extension request for the North Lawrence Riverfront addition. Thank you, Becky.
So this does bring us to the end of our agenda. The preliminary plat was considered, it was initiated in 2012, was approved along with several rezoning, several parcels to be rezoned and extended the downtown. The preliminary plat has been approved. It has met most of its conditions, I believe, and but the applicant is not prepared to move forward, and they're requesting an extension of this approval, and that extension requires approval by this body.
Thank you.
There's
Come talk to us, Paul. Tell us why you need an extension.
Well, to say, this is probably the most complicated project we've ever worked on, but we meet all the time, we're meeting more and more, but we're making progress, and we need an extension because the last thing you want to do is backpedal 7 years, maybe 8. But so we're happy where we've gotten with staff, and we're making progress, and we know we've got a deadline, and we've got a lot of stuff to do.
Thank you. If you have
Thank
any
you.
questions, we'll let you know. To the commission for questions? Commissioner Briggs?
Just a quick question for staff, and I'm not sure if this was in the report or not, but could you just describe, I mean, I think I understand why we have a limitation, a time limit, and that these expire because, you know, changing circumstances, we don't want to let it just sit out there forever if something changes before they actually get to building. Are there any other sort of policy reasons for that expiration that we should be thinking about?
a lot of times we're looking at, have there been amendments or changes to the code that affects the design of the subdivision? In this particular case, there have not been.
Okay.
So, in that period.
Follow-up to that, if there have been changes to the code and there was a request for an extension that ended up going forward and got approved, would they apply to the code as it was originally approved? Okay.
Good question. Sorry, we have one member of our audience. I sort of jumped over the public. Did you want to speak on this item? Okay, just making sure I didn't. Our audience keeps getting thinner and thinner. I didn't want to skip anybody. Any other questions?
Yeah, what's the parking requirement for downtown commercial? Under the current zone?
What's the question?
Well,
Yeah.
right now it says that this is, zoned, will be downtown commercial zoning, so I'm asking what the parking requirements are.
So, yes, and that was part of that discussion early on, that the downtown district does not technically have a parking requirement. This project will have a parking requirement. There is also a requirement that the applicant submit design guidelines that go with this project, and that's part of why the zoning ordinances have never been published, because that is a condition of approval, that design guidelines be provided and they come before this body. We've looked at a couple of drafts. We haven't gone back to that in some time. We gave a little bit of feedback to the applicant, so that's still something to come forward, and parking would be one of those elements that we would look at in those design guidelines.
Chairman. Just follow up to design guidelines, would those be the design guidelines we have in place for the downtown commercial district or their own?
They would be their own.
Okay.
I have a question for the applicant. It doesn't have to do too much with this application. I'm just interested. So, like our former chair, Commissioner Lees, I'm just going to take it away. The new regulations coming out of the state about an open, a specific zone for open alcohol, is that in this plan at all? I wondered if that.
I mean, we're not.
Made too far away from it to know.
Yeah, that's not the intention.
Okay.
And we are in CD zoning, so we get the same requirements as far as, we can't have a bar. We'd have to have a restaurant that sells a certain amount of foods.
Yeah,
So,
I just thought about this project when I heard about that on the news.
it would be a good use in certain areas.
Anything else? Commissioner Britton?
This is, I think the rezonings of all this is one of my first memories on the planning commission when Penny and I first started. So I will move that we, since I really want to see it actually happen, move that we extend the approval of the preliminary plat for 24 months.
Commissioner Britton's motion, Commissioner Von Auken second. I'm only going to vote for this if you'll come back in 24 months and
To check up on it?
Yeah.
I'll speak against the motion to allow an extension at that time.
Any other discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. Passes 8-0. I believe that finishes our agenda. Staff, do you have anything else? Okay. Commissioner Von Auken, Commissioner Britton, thank you very much. This ends our meeting. We are adjourned.